Fast X is everything you want in a Fast and Furious film. So everybody strap in, fasten your seatbelts, grab a Corona, and that sounds like I'm encouraging drink driving. Not what I mean. Fasten your seatbelts, park the car, grab a Corona, and let's do this review. What makes a Fast and Furious film? Is it Coronas with La Familia? Is it the fact that they love to retcon villains into heroes, or just resurrect anybody, no matter how much they were engulfed in flames? Or is it the glorious trope in these franchises to just have the cars not obey the laws of physics whatsoever? Of course, because this franchise is magnificent and unique and absurd and just utterly delightful. It's all of those things. But for me personally, there is one aspect of the Fast and Furious franchise that has been the longest running tradition, and it is the most Fast and Furious thing in the world, in the fact that it is chaotic, insane, inspired, and utterly unique, and it doesn't really make any sense, but let me try and piece it together, and that is the titles of the Fast and Furious films. So we start with The Fast and the Furious, classic, iconic, and then straight away in the sequel, we drop the thes and we have 2 twos. Not 1 2, but 2 twos. And then in Tokyo Drift, we drop the numbers and we have a subtitle. Somehow the only subtitle in the entire franchise. And then in Fast and Furious, we drop the numbers entirely and we drop the thes, Facebook style. And then in Fast 5, we drop the Furious. And then in Fast and Furious 6, we bring back the Furious. And then in Furious 7, we drop the Fast. And then in The Fate of the Furious, we keep the double F sound, but we drop the Fast. And then in F9, it completely loses its mind and it drops everything, but keeps the single F. F9 also has the insane decision to rename the Fast and Furious franchise The Fast Saga. What does that even leave? The 10th movie. Roman numerals, baby. That's right. Fast X brings in Roman numerals. It's just so complete. And it's like, did they know they were going to get to 10 so they never used Roman numerals? Because the Roman numeral can work at times, you know, Star Wars use it all the time. But Fast X just sounds amazing. It's perfect. It's extreme. It's over the top. It's classic Fast. But you might say, why did they bring back the Fast and not back the Furious? Furious X sounds pretty cool. Yes, but Fast X is a sequel to all 9 films. But in true Fast and Furious spirit, this film retcons the villain into Fast 5. So really, this feels like a true sequel to Fast 5. So therefore, it is called Fast X. Hey guys, I'm Jax, and this is my spoiler review for Fast X. If you're new to the channel, I would love it if you could give me a like, subscribe, bloody comment what you thought about the movie, all the things. If you love talking movies and TV shows, that's all I do here, baby. That's all I do all day. Except, of course, when I'm at work. There is nothing more Fast and Furious than a retcon, and I adore the idea of bringing Jason Momoa, Khal Drogo himself, into the end of Fast 5. That is the pinnacle of the franchise. It's the best sequence. It's when the film really just went off and completely lost its mind, and to see it all again, but like adding Jason Momoa in was crazy. It was so exciting and amazing. The moment I realized he was in the car that had the big minigun, Gatling gun thing, I completely lost my mind. I knew at that point I was going to be in for one of the most spectacular, just jaw on the floor, the entire movie cinema experience. It's so funny to me just to see all these scenes again, but being like, hey, Jason Momoa was actually there. But this franchise has been doing that continuously, bringing in Jason Statham and being like, he was actually in that car that killed Han. And then being like, actually that car where Han exploded, he wasn't even in that car. This franchise is nothing if not retcon after retcon after retcon, just completely getting so convoluted, so over the top, and so messy. But it's just like, it feels like this beautiful mess. Where like, if I look back on these 10 movies, it feels like one of the most crazy, just wild nightmare dreams that you could possibly imagine. I actually can't describe how much joy it brings me. I feel like so many franchises are afraid to just lose their mind and just go, hey, this is all a bit absurd. Let's just embrace the absurdity and just go for it. Obviously, I'm not saying all franchises should do this. I just feel like once you hit a certain level of craziness, just go through the roof. Like, there's no point in doing an 8 out of 10 Fast and Furious vibe at this point. Go 12 out of 10 or even 15 out of 10. Just do it. So let's discuss Jason Momoa. he's got to be the friendliest, nicest man who's ever lived, right? Like, just seeing him on screen, his presence, his screen presence, and just vibe and personality, it is so infectious. Every time he was on screen, I was giddy with excitement, and I was just having so much fun seeing how much fun he was having. Has a man ever chewed more scenery in a film than Jason Momoa in Fast X? The answer's no. And if the answer is yes, who? Show me that film, because it will now be my favorite film and performance, because Jason Momoa is psycho in this movie. I don't even know what he's doing half the time. But what's more Fast and Furious than a chaotic, insane decision that almost doesn't make sense? It's so good. He fits into this franchise and this movie so well. I also love the fact that Khal Drogo doesn't die in this movie. The movie ends on one of the most insane things I've ever seen. I was like, whoa, this reminds me of Hobbit 2, where it ends with the dragon. You're like, oh my god, we're doing a cliffhanger, are we? I guess we are. He is perfect for our big bad villain to finish off this saga, and tying him to the strongest film and all those moments was just really, really clever. Like, I was like, hey, this is like low-key actually a really good decision. Like, it's absurd and crazy and it's really funny, and they can kind of be like, hey, we're doing the bank vault, but it's a big giant bomb instead, and it's like a combination of like Indiana Jones with the big ball, the first movie, but the vault, but times 300, and it might be a little CGI at times, but it's a really fun sequence, and I like him being like, hey, that was a reference to when you stole my dad's money, and then bringing us back to the bridge that ends the 5th movie, and also just bringing us back to Rio and all these characters from Fast 5. I felt like it was a really clever decision to kind of take us back to the best film. Like, I love 8 and I really like 7 as well, but 5 is the best film. And so instead of just being like, oh, we're just doing the same thing because we're out of ideas, it feels like it's tied to character, which is like, it doesn't need to be. These movies don't need to make sense or have any rhyme or reason, yet it felt like it did in this one, which I really enjoyed. So along with Khal Drogo as the villain, we have a new villain in Alan Ritchson, who you may know from Smallville or more recently as Reacher in Reacher. He's so good in Reacher. If you haven't watched it, watch Reacher. I've loved this guy since Smallville, and he was in Titans as well, and I've always really, really liked him, but when he appeared in Reacher, I was like, when did he become the most ripped man who's ever lived? Perfect casting to bring him into the Fast and Furious franchise. He is just golden and ripped, and he's never looked better in anything. He fits the franchise almost more than Jason Momoa. He was so cool in this movie. I loved him as the villain. I loved him just being like, Mr. Nobody's gone and in secret hiding or whatever, because for some reason we can't pay for Kurt Russell right now. And so he takes control of the agency, which is all that spy nonsense that started in 7. I just love how, like, as soon as they brought that in, they're like, we are just going to make this a spy franchise now, but cars. I love it. I love spy stuff. I love that God's Eye just keeps appearing in all the movies. It's so nonsense and overpowered, but it's so spy. It's like, I love Mission Impossible and I love James Bond. I particularly love Mission Impossible. And whilst that is pretty over the top and extreme, it feels like it can't do what Fast does, because if it tried to do what Fast does, it would, I don't know, I feel like I wouldn't take it seriously anymore, and it kind of still had, like, so I just feel like these two franchises, what I'm trying to say is, together these two franchises give me everything I want in spy, espionage, action movies. Like, Fast does its own thing and Mission does its own thing, and together we kind of just get everything. And if I'm occasionally like, I want to see everyone die in a church, I can watch Kingsman 1, The Secret Service. Cinema just like is like, you want spy stuff? You want all the spy stuff? What about this franchise, or this franchise, or this franchise? Oh, and also James Bond. James Bond's doing its own thing, very self-serious, but great as well in its own right. I feel like a kid in the candy store, but if you replace the candy with spy films. One of the funniest and simultaneously dumb and almost annoying, but so beautifully endearing, and I think it's always a good decision, is the Fast franchise's kind of bizarre decision and choice to be like, here's a villain, and then in the next movie, retcon their entire character, change their personality, and just be like, now he's a good guy? So first, Jason Statham kills Han, and then he starts this movie blowing up a hospital, and he tries to kill all of them throughout the movie, and then in 8, Dom enlists him and his brother, who was the villain in 6, to save his baby son. And it's so crazy, it's so over the top. But I think the Fate of the Furious is like one of its biggest strengths is Jason Statham. He's so good in it. I like the change of personality. The scene with him and the baby on the plane, one of the best scenes in the whole movie. He's really, really great. So it's like, it doesn't make any sense for the characters in the story, but just like isolated in scenes and how I feel watching that movie, if I don't think about the fact that he killed Han. Yes, I know Han's not dead, but they think he did kill Han. It's so stupid, but it's really great and it makes the film better. And so in F9, they brought in John Cena, who is awesome comedically. He's a really, really funny guy, but he was so self-serious in that movie. And yes, he changes and he becomes a good guy at the end of the movie. But in this movie, they just retcon his character entirely. Yes, he's a good guy and we knew he'd be a good guy, but his personality is entirely different and it's a great choice. John Cena in this movie is amazing. I have a huge issue with something with his character, but I'll get to that when I discuss him. My point is, this franchise just loves to retcon and be like, villain? Oh, don't worry, he's a good guy now. And this movie, like, utilizes that stupid, insane trope and tricks us. At least it tricked me for the biggest kind of twist of the movie. And I was like actually floored. I was like, what the hell? Am I watching like a real movie with actual emotion? I am shocked. I was like watching Fight Club for the first time. Kind of. I mean, it wasn't that shocking. It was pretty shocking though. And that is, of course, Alan Ritchson in this movie. He's the bad guy. And then on a whim, like with no character arc, no thing to change, suddenly there's just guns and shooting on him and Dom, and he's like, hey Dom, I didn't believe you, but now I do. And he throws him a gun and suddenly he's a good guy. It felt like they were parroting themselves and just being like, you know what? We don't have time to like wait for the end of the movie and retcon his character and make him a good guy in Fast X Part 2 or whatever. Like, we don't have time for that. So we're just going to do it in this movie. Will there be a character arc? Will there be really any reason for him to do it? I don't know, guns are shooting at him, and so he just switches. So whilst at the time I was having so much fun with the film, I was like, I don't care. That's really, really dumb and super, super lazy, but I don't care. Whatever. This is what the franchise does. What difference does it make if it's earlier in this film and not in the next one? That moment that he had the rocket launcher and it was revealed that he took down the plane with all the ensemble team, Roman and Tej and that chick from Game of Thrones, I couldn't believe it. I was genuinely shocked, like actually in awe. It is such a good twist because it just kind of plays on you accepting these stupid, dumb things in these movies and like endearing. Like, I love it. Like, this is like an endearing comment where it's like, I just embraced it because it's like, yeah, this is Fast X. I know what I'm watching. I don't care there was no character arc. And for it to be a twist and he's twisted on Dom and like, in this movie, Khal Drogo keeps being like, I've studied you, Dom, and I know you down to a T. Family, you always think everyone's going to turn back and be on your side. Like, they mention it earlier in the film. They kind of like signposted or whatever. And so it's so funny that they kind of utilize this thing that has been a trope and then they use it to trick us. It's actually ingenious. Like, and then that moment as well, where it wasn't just that Khal Drogo has been retconned into Fast 5, but so has Alan Ritchson. Like, he's there too. The moment they're both standing there and the vault's disappeared from like the bank. It's just, and he's like, well, our partnership started with a bad start. I was in awe. I was like, this movie has everything. It's doing everything. And to utilize this twist, this big shocking twist, as he's killed all the ensemble team, but the plane goes off and explodes. And if I know anything about the Fast and Furious franchise, is even if I see someone engulfed in flames and die, I don't necessarily believe that they are dead, you know, because no one's ever died and every single character, except for the guys in the first movie, have come back and are alive and are totally fine. And the explanation is usually just like, that was a neat magic trick. Or they just like don't mention it. Like Lettie, when she came back, she just rolled down a hill and just wasn't in the car. Han, just a magic trick. Not his best magic trick, but just a magic trick. Was it a clone, a hologram? What's going on, Mr. Nobody? Explain yourself. The end of this film, the cliffhanger of this film is spectacular. It is so funny. Just having them on that big dam, what's it called? You know what it's called, it doesn't matter. And the explosions and the things, and he's like, you forgot one thing, Khal Drogo. You didn't take my car. Dom for president, and he just like flies down. He's driving down the dam, and all the explosions are boom, 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 boom. And he flies down. They land in the water, and it reveals the whole dam has been like hooked up with explosives. And I'm like, this film is never going to end. This is so exciting. And he looks at his son. He looks up at the explosion, and when it cut to black, I swear to God, my like heart was just like, it disappeared. I was like, I can't breathe. I was in such awe because I suddenly realized when it cut to black, we are ending this film on a cliffhanger. A cliffhanger! I know that this is like the beginning of the end. And, you know, when they were making this film, this was part 1 of a part 2 finale. And of course, we've found out very recently that Vin Diesel is going to pull a Hobbit and turn the 2 films into a 3-film kind of finale act, which, you know, worked out really well for The Hobbit. But you know what The Hobbit didn't have? La Familia. It does feel like this film was like doing The Empire Strikes Back to have the final film, Fast X Part 2. I really hope they call it Part 2 because it sounds so bad. Fast X Part 2. But we haven't had a Part 2 yet. But then we can do Fast X Part 2 and then call the final film The Final Fast, or The Fast and the Final Furious, or this is the last of the Fast and the Furious films. I don't know. There's lots of good choices that aren't bad like that. The end is bold. It's exciting. I also love the idea that they're like, oh my God, Roman and all the ensemble cast died and exploded. No, they didn't. No, they didn't, Fast and Furious. How dare you try and trick me? No, I love it. I love it. They're just like, oh my God, they died. Alan Ritchson, he's actually a bad guy. He killed them. I'm just so excited to see how everyone gets out of this completely impossible situation. It's so exciting. It's like, genuinely, I'm like, oh my God, I am actually so keen for Fast X Part 2. Like, he can't come fast enough. Like, because what's so good about this franchise, it is so absurd and so dumb that it isn't a moment where it's like at the end of Sherlock Season 2, it ends with a cliffhanger and it's like, oh, how are they going to explain this? And they don't, spoilers, but they try to, do they? I don't know, it's complicated, but there's nothing they could do that would kind of be, like, it would satisfy you, because it's such an impossible situation. Whereas this, they're going to just do something nonsense, and it's going to be so funny and awesome, and it's going to kick off the film in such a beautifully magical and nonsense way. It's just going to be hot, fiery nonsense. I just cannot wait. I hope it's some kind of flying car situation, because we've had a lot of things. We haven't had a car with wings yet, or maybe we have. I don't know. It's hard to remember all of the hot nonsense that has happened in this franchise. So whilst we're on the ending and the cliffhanger, there are 2 scenes after this cliffhanger that ends the movie. Like, the screen goes black and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe the movie's going to end. I just was waiting for that directed by, like, title. And then the fact it cuts to, like, another scene, I'm like, that's odd. That's how you end the movie. That's odd. Why would you have another... Oh, I know what's going to happen. I was just like in my bones. Like, I felt like, I was like, if you don't end the movie with the blackout being like, Dom's going to die, his son's going to die, cliffhanger. This scene is going to be so crazy. And I like knew it in my bones. I'm like, I bet you $200 million that Wonder Woman isn't dead. Because I've recently watched all the movies again. Bloody check out my channel and the reviews. And when she falls out of the plane or off the car near the plane or wherever it is, you don't see her body, like, because of course they're not going to show Wonder Woman's body just hit the pavement and explode in blood and pus and whatever. So she's fine. She's totally fine. I am super curious if they're going to try and, like, show us, like, she fell off the plane. They all stopped the plane, like, a kilometer down, like, the airstrip. They didn't go to check on her to see if she, like, to bury her body or anything. They're just like, well, let's get out of Dodge. Oh, she died. It was all the way back down there. Let's just presume she's dead. Even though, you know, that's not a thing that happens. And this is the movie in which we start the resurrection because Lettie is, like, alive again. And it's just so crazy and nonsense and insane to have Lettie, who was the first character to be resurrected, look at Gal Gadot and be like, oh my God, she came back to life? That's crazy. This is the 3rd time, Lettie. You were the first time. Then there was Han, in which everyone's reaction was pretty, like everyone's reaction is always just like, oh, they're back. Cool. This one was, like, just so absurd. It was, like, full circle. Like, the first person to be resurrected is commenting, oh my God, she's resurrected? Why are you even surprised at this point? I mean, at this point, I'd be surprised if someone stayed dead. Like, if John Cena is actually dead, I'd be surprised. So, on John Cena. I love how they retconned him to just be John Cena in this movie. I hated in F9 how John Cena is just, like, not fun. He's not, like, lovable. And yes, he's not as funny as, say, a Peacemaker character in this movie. But this movie, like, this franchise isn't as funny as James Gunn's writing, at least in, you know, my taste. And him in the Suicide Squad he's spectacular. He steals that movie. He's so, so good. I feel like that movie was why I went, wait, he was bad in F9. Why was he bad in F9? I expected him to be that good. And he is this good in this movie. Like, not as funny, but like, I like that they're bringing out that comedy in him. The whole movie, I was like, what's in that canoe? I know it's not a canoe because I know what franchise I'm watching. What's in the canoe? The realization the canoe was a mini spaceship. What? My mind, like, it like stopped working for a second. I'm overloaded with emotion. I don't think I'm going to leave this cinema. I'm going to die of happiness in this cinema. I'm curious how people are going to kind of find this John Cena with the Dom's kid, but I really loved it. It was like, yeah, have him be happy and fun, and he's his brother, so it's his like nephew or whatever. I found that really, really endearing and like really nice. Like John Cena has this really like fun charm. Like he's a big, giant, ripped guy, but I think him like pairing him with a little kid, that totally works. Like that plays into John Cena's strengths, and I found that really, really good. You know what I did not like? And it was probably the only thing in this film I actually really hated. And I hate it in every movie that does this. It's so annoying. I call it the Saw Gerrera effect. If you don't know what that means, that's a character in Star Wars who's like, for the rebellion, I'm gonna die, even though nothing makes sense for me to just sacrifice myself for no reason. It's a self-sacrifice that doesn't make sense. Like, you could totally escape the situation, but you're doing a self-sacrifice for no reason, just because they need to emotionally have a moment where a character dies, and they sacrifice themselves, but they don't need to. Like, John Cena could crash the car into those cars and all do the big explosion, but not die obviously, he might not be dead. I feel like it must be that John Cena doesn't want to come back to the franchise. That must be what it is. He's like, cool, fix my character, because everyone hated me in that movie. Fix me so we have like a good taste in our mouth, but I'm done. I don't want to be in the finale. I don't know, it really, really, really annoyed me. I'm having so much fun at that point. I felt like so like kind of put off. I'm like, he just didn't need to do that. And it makes it worse because everyone comes back to life. So it kind of feels weird to even try and do a death scene. I think if you're going to do that, you should have a scene where Jason Momoa just like shoots him in the head. Like, I know that's like kind of almost too dark for this franchise and how much fun and silly it is. But I feel like, yeah, I don't know. It's like if you're doing a big character death, because you've resurrected so many of them at this point, I feel like you need to kind of do it in a way where it isn't a self-sacrifice, because it's like, oh, they've done so much nonsense and silly stuff. Like 5 seconds earlier in this action scene, Dom's car lands on 2 other cars and they explode, but his doesn't, which I love. To be clear, I love all that. But then when you suddenly have a moment where it's meant to be very serious and somber, and he explodes with all these other cars, I just feel like, I'm like, oh, so this is like a real normal movie now for 5 seconds as you do this scene? So I think you need to present it in a different way. I don't like how it's a self-sacrifice for no reason. It just feels off to kill a character when the franchise is it's so beyond that at this point. And maybe I'm just disappointed because no more John Cena. What, are you kidding me? I want to see more John Cena. So we have a bunch of new characters in this film. We have Brie Larson. We have the girl who plays Ratcatcher. They're both really great. I love the girl who plays Ratcatcher. Not enough to Google her name, but to me, I feel like it's more endearing to be like, I loved you so much as Ratcatcher 2. I realize she's the second one. Taika Waititi was the first one as a dab. I remember things sometimes. I loved her in that role. She was so, so good. She kind of stole that whole movie, except for John Cena, who I just said stole that movie. Everybody stole that movie. It was a great movie. They were really, really great in this movie. There's a moment Brie Larson rocks up with like a gun or a bazooka or some kind of weapon. I can't remember. But she's in this blue suit, and I was like, whoo! Looking pretty good. That feels creepy to say, but she looked great. So Anna Lucia gets captured by the government really early on in the film, and she's kind of not sidelined. I feel like most characters, they're all pushed aside after the big, epic Rome action scene, which I swear to God was like a 35-minute action scene. Just so crazy. Just kept going and going and going and going. It was amazing. I loved it so much. And so she's pushed to the side and she's locked in a thing, and her and Charlize Theron have a classic punch for a bit and now we're mates. Kind of, a little bit. Once again, Charlize Theron killed Dom's, like the mother of Dom's baby, who Anna Lucia is raising, but they punched for a bit, but now they're mates, because this is Fast and Furious, and nothing is more important than having a villain and then being like, but they're fine. It doesn't matter who they tried to kill or how many of your babies they tried to murder. It's the next movie now, so shut up, they're your friend. I also just really like that moment where Anna Lucia like opens the door up and she's like, oh damn, we're in like the snow or whatever. I was generally like, oh, how are they going to get out of here? Now you might be thinking, hey, you've talked for very, very long time. And you have not really mentioned Roman, Tej, Daenerys' friend, and maybe there's someone else with them. Han! Yeah, I don't know. They're definitely the weak link of the film. They're all just, I don't know. It's like, whatever. They're like, Roman does his Roman thing where, like, depending on how I feel in a mood, Roman's either the funniest character in the franchise, or I'm just like, I hope you die. What I did really enjoy, even though I felt it was too brief, was Han and Jason Statham. They hyped that in the post-credits of last movie. It was almost the most exciting thing of, like, F9. I was like, oh my god! The guy who he thought he killed Han, but Han never died. Oh my god, so much craziness. I actually thought they were going to be teamed up for more of the movie, for like maybe the whole movie. It was kind of a bit odd. It was kind of like, oh, okay, they fight, like they have one scene where they're fighting, and then they fight some bad guys, and they're like, let's team up. We fight for a bit, but now we're mates. The best thing that ever happens in any movie. I just love it when people fight and then they are mates. But yeah, that scene kind of felt a little short, and I was disappointed Jason Statham wasn't in more of the movie. Let's talk post-credit scene. Now, I had this scene ruined. I had this scene ruined for me by the internet, by some horrible human being that decided to reveal this post-credit scene. I swear to God, if I didn't know this was going to happen and I saw this in the cinema with the emotional feeling I had felt, like with the way my body was like, I had so much fun. I was in so much awe. The cliffhanger ending. Wonder Woman is alive. Of course she is. Yes, let's go. And then there's a post-credit scene. And suddenly realizing in that moment, it's like Jason Momoa's like, I've come for you because you killed my father, because Dom crashed the car and it's mostly his fault, but you know who actually shot him in the face and murdered him? You. And revealing it's The Rock, and then he says his classic line, not you son of a bitch, you son bitch, and he crashes the phone. He's got the goatee back. This is no Fast and Furious presents Hobbs and Shaw nonsense with no goatee, which is something I only just very recently realized when a podcast I was listening to mentioned it, so I guess it doesn't really matter. But the goatee is part of him, and it's a bit grey now because time has passed. Cinema, aren't you glorious? It was a moment that I would argue, if I didn't know was going to happen, that would probably be the single greatest thing I had ever seen in a post-credit scene. I don't know how the MCU keeps getting away with stealing the idea of a post-credit scene. Tokyo Drift, a film that came out 2 years before Iron Man 1, ends with Dom Toretto being like, connected universe, baby. Anthology series? I think not. And now, 6 or 7 movies later, post-credit scene with The Rock. I have never been so happy that The Black Adam was such a bad movie than right now, because he has to crawl his way back and beg to Dominic Toretto to let him back into the greatest franchise that ever lived. If you don't include like all the really, really, really good ones. 6th to 12th best franchise ever.